Let us start the session for today. The transactions, before we go on to understand the nature, it is very important to understand the ecosystem of the GST in a company. So for every registered person, the person will be having various branches which will be interacting inter se, but each of the branch will be interacting with the customer and the vendor also in the same state or in the different state. If the vendor is in the same state, you will get a ITC in the form of CGST and SGST. And if he is in a different state, it will be IGST, ITC. And so will be the case if your customer is in the same state with the POS, place of supply, in the same state. And for a customer, when place of supply is in a different state, the taxes will be levied as IGST. Now, to this particular extent, when we talk about the customer and vendor, everything which will be uh, transferred or received in form of credit or the output liability, we have a electronic mechanism which has been provided by the GSTN, whereby all your output and the inputs transactions are declared. So this particular ecosystem, while it is interacting with many or multiple, I would say, stakeholders, we are focusing only on the transactions which occur within the entity between the various units of the same registered person. Now, coming on to this aspect, the first thing which we need to understand that every unit which is in a different state, meaning thereby any establishment of a person which is into a different state, is deemed to be a distinct person. When we speak about two different person, let us say Mr. X and Mr. Y, we understand that they both are different person. When we speak about two associated enterprises, so let it be Messrs. X and Messrs. X Subsidiary Private Limited. Both of the companies are even distinct person because both have been registered as a different person under the Companies Act. We are specifically talking about a deeming fiction which has been brought in within the establishment of the same person, meaning thereby that particular company having a branch in Delhi and a branch in Mumbai. Now, these two particular branches of the same company under the same PAN will be deemed to be two distinct person as if they are company X and company Y. Now, this particular deeming fiction has been brought in by way of section 25, subsection 4 and subsection 5, and similarly by way of section 8 of IGST Act. So while section 25, 4 and 5 of the CGST Act dealt more particularly between the establishments of a company or a person between the same state or between different states, Section 8 of the IGST travels even beyond the taxable territory and has presumed this particular distinct person fiction for the units which are lying outside the taxable territory also. So for example, a branch in Mumbai and a branch in, let us say, Paris. So both of them have been deemed to be distinct person for the purpose of GST statute. Now, any transactions between these units, be it the branch which is in Delhi, vis-a-vis the branch which is in Mumbai, vis-a-vis the branch which is in Paris, all of them have been deemed to be separate, distinct person, and all the transactions would be taxed as if they are three independent persons interacting in commercial terms with each other. Now, as you all remember, inter se, since there is no consideration, reason being I cannot pay consideration to myself. I cannot ask for a price for a supply from myself. And therefore, in absentia of an obligation for consideration, these particular transactions do not fall within the ambit of section 7, subsection 1, subclause A. Reason very simple being in those particular transaction consideration is a necessary element, and therefore these particular transaction, they are covered by schedule 1, which are transactions without consideration. So let us examine what all transactions will partake the character of a supply, or for that matter a cross charge, and for that matter an input service distribution. Reason being, these are the three primary transactions which can happen between the branches in terms of flow of taxes. Now, if you talk about supply between the branches, you will have to first appreciate schedule 1. We will be focusing only on this particular aspect, supply between related persons or distinct persons. So in our case, it is distinct persons when made in the course or furtherance of business. So in business, there is nothing personal. Every transaction which will happen between the one branch or the other branch in a different state, or two branches which are in the same state but having different GSTN, in those particular cases, the transactions are covered within the ambit of schedule 1, and they need not have any consideration for the purpose of being covered under the definition of supply. Now, you have to appreciate two things. Number one, Section 7 only provides for creation of a charge in terms of defining supply. But a charge is complete when you have a consideration also, or a transaction value also, whereby the tax can be computed. The uh, element of a charge, the value, the rate, and also the taxable person. These are the four basic elements without which a charge is not possible. Now, when there is an absentia of a consideration, the deeming fiction in terms of supply has been brought in by Section 7. Similarly, a deeming fiction as to the transaction value has been brought in by Section 15, subsection 4, read with the relevant rules, Rule 28 to 30, I would say 32 primarily, not 33. So in those particular cases, you will have to see under what particular rule the transaction will fall in order to arrive at a transaction value on which a rate will be applied to determine the tax payable by the branch when it is supplying something to the other branch. Now, when you are saying supply, the supply also has a very distinct character. Reason being, supply is a identifiable supply. Supply can be in terms of an operational activity, in terms of a financing activity. It can also be in terms of a investing activity. In terms of a operational activity, it means all the operations required or necessary for the conduct of the business, which will include the transfer of the stock, which will include the manufacturing, which will include the requirement of the personnel to perform a particular function. All these transactions will be called the supply. However, when you say supply, it has to be a specific requirement of the branch, which is being called by one branch from another. So let me take a very simple example. The Haryana branch is to supply 1000 bags of cement to a customer. It has 800 bags with itself, but it does not have 200 bags. However, it found that the Delhi branch has 500 bags of cement, out of which it requested the Delhi branch to supply the 200 bags of cement to Haryana branch. Now, please understand and appreciate, in this particular transaction, the supply is very distinctively being called. It is identifiable very clearly. It is a requirement of a particular branch being fulfilled by another branch. So it will fall within the purview of supply. Supply per se, as we understand that. It is nowhere related to a particular branch consuming something and appropriating something. It is a complete transfer of a particular good from one branch to another. Similar would be the case when there is a transfer of fixed asset. So there are refrigerators which are there in one branch, and because of the increased demand in another branch, the refrigerator from branch in, let us say, Himachal Pradesh is being shifted to the branch in Haryana. So that is again a very clear demarcated movement of goods from one branch to another, and therefore this particular transaction will also be called a supply amongst the branches. Now, coming on to these services, how can services being called and being provided by a particular branch to another? It is being intangible. Services have always been into a tough space, but let me give you some very specific example. The first example is, I am a company engaged into the designing and installation of modular kitchen for the customers. Now, in this particular case, my entire designing team is sitting in Gurugram, but my installation teams are located in Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata. So they will go, the installation team will go to the client specific place and will take the measurements and will provide those particular measurements to the designing branch, which is in Gurugram, and designing branch will give a particular design for a particular customer to that particular installation branch. Now that installation branch is also the customer relation branch, and it will be supplying, or it will be invoicing in entirety for the entire project to the customer. And therefore this Gurugram branch has provided the design not to the customer but to the Mumbai branch. So this is a very specific call for the service being called by one branch from the another, and accordingly the services has been supplied by one branch to another. Similar would be the case when there are two chartered accountant branches, two branches of a chartered accountant firm, and in case there is a specialized opinion required, let us say on FEMA, which is whereby the specializing partner belongs to the Mumbai branch. This particular Delhi branch has called for a specific opinion on a point from that Mumbai partner. So there is a supply which is very particularly provided by the Mumbai branch to the Delhi branch of services. Similar would be another case when a person who has let us say a tour and travel business has IATA license in one of the branches, and all other branches are undertaking the booking of the tour operation. Now in this particular case, the IATA branch will book the air tickets, which will form part of the tour package given by the other branches to the customer. So this IATA branch is also supplying services of air travel agent to those particular tour operating branches of the same person. So these are some of the very specific example how a transaction of service also can tantamount to a supply amongst the different branches. In all these particular cases, the every supply is identifiable distinctively, and it will be the open market value, which will be the transaction value at which such particular transactions will be taxed. However, there is a specific relief given under Rule 28, second proviso, whereby it has been said that if the receiving branch is able to take the entire credit, then in that particular case, the value which is mentioned on the invoice shall form the open market value, and that will not be challenged. Now, please appreciate it itself is a long topic. My sole point of being, discussing this particular point here is to give you an idea about the valuation also. However, the focus that the transaction per se amounts to supply is what my context of deliberation in this particular topic. Now, please also understand that there can also be a specific supply of intangibles amongst different units, whereby the agreement is being undertaken by a specific branch. However, the royalty obligation arises due to manufacture at a different branch. Similar things can also happen in case of bill to ship to transaction. Now, these are very particular transactions which you have to appreciate. That suppose I have ordered a marketing material of 10,000 keychains, whereby 5,000 keychains will go to Delhi branch and 5,000 keychains will go to Jaipur branch. Now, the person who is invoicing will invoice the entire 10,000 keychains to the Delhi branch. Now, this particular gentleman will issue the invoice of Delhi branch, where the supply is also in Delhi, as CGST and SGST, bill to and ship to the same location. But in case of Jaipur branch, it will do what? It will have to issue the invoice as bill to Delhi branch but ship to Jaipur branch. In this particular case, the Delhi branch will also have to issue another invoice, since it is not the person who has received the goods, but it is the person on whose instruction the goods are delivered to another different person. Another different person means distinct person, and therefore Delhi branch will issue a invoice of 5,000 keychains to the Jaipur branch. Now, these particular kinds of transactions are not very uncommon, and they can be found everywhere, because different branches usually get the orders when placed by the head office, and in such cases the head office can get the invoice of such supply of goods. Now, in this particular case, since these are goods being supplied at the instruction of another person, that different person also need to issue a invoice in context of those particular goods to such particular location. So this is another concept of supply between the branches. One of the most unique transactions which I would like to speak will be the warranty or the replacement transaction, whereby the OEM branch, which is the manufacturing branch, the factory, it manufactures a particular product and undertakes to supply that particular product to the customer, and also undertakes to provide the warranty service to the customer. Usually that particular branch has the value of warranty inbuilt into its pricing. And when it supplies to the other branch, it is merely as if it is supplying for further sale to any of its distributor. And those particular branches do not imbibe the value of warranty in their particular margins. So in this particular case, the factory will be the person liable to perform that particular warranty or replacement service. Now, suppose the factory was in Baddi and the replacement is being done by the Pune branch. Now, this Pune branch has replaced a laptop which was under the warranty given by the Baddi person. So, two different person. One person has given a replacement to a customer on behalf of a third person. What will this Pune branch do? Pune branch has effectively made a supply to the Baddi branch, at whose instruction the new laptop has been supplied to the customer. So in this particular case, the invoice will be issued by Pune branch for replacement or for any repair or any other work done on behalf of the Baddi branch for the customer. So this particular invoice is very, very important and very pertinent to be issued between the branches. And parallelly, since Pune branch has got received a old laptop on behalf of the Baddi branch will issue a invoice of the old laptop to the Pune branch, so that the proper assets and their respective taxes reach the correct branches. It's a very complicated system to address this particular kind of movement of goods and to record these kinds of transaction, because these changing of a laptop might look to be a very a big transaction compared to when I say the Pune branch might have just replaced a IC which is worth 5 rupees into the laptop, and therefore it has provided the repair services along with that IC on behalf of the Baddi branch. Now when you say such a minuscule kind of a transaction, then also there is a supply and that has to be recorded. A nil value does not mean a value. The value can be 1 rupee, it can be 1 crore rupee or any other value, but a nil value cannot be a value. You have to please appreciate and remember that. Other transactions are innumerous in this particular thing, but when you say supply, please do remember to stick to one thing, that there has to be a recognizable, identifiable, required supply between two branches, whereby that particular specific supply is either called specifically or by a general mandate by the other branch from the supplying branch. So this was all about the supply. Now, how cross charge works? Cross charge is basically a cost which is incurred by a particular branch, and whereby the benefit of that particular cost is being given in intangible form to different branches, and therefore that particular cost need to be appropriated between the different branches. There is no one-to-one supply of any service in this particular case, but the benefit flows in general to all the branches. The most particular example in this particular case is that of the services of a head office or corporate office. In that particular case, these services are obtained in terms of setup of an entire infrastructure of head office or corporate office, where the directors, the heads of different, I would say, units, they sit, they perform their function, they guide and they manage the brain and the hands of that particular the registered person is located in that particular corporate office, and accordingly that particular corporate office is not working for itself, but it is working for the good, or it is working for the benefit of all the units across. Now you cannot allocate one to one which particular unit has called in for what service from this particular corporate office, and therefore the only methodology which remains is that the consumption which is made for provision of that particular service, consumption not merely in terms of those particular input service or capital goods where ITC is available. It will also include those particular costs where no ITC was available, and therefore the total cost which has been incurred need to be attributed in order to provide a equated kind of a I would say the structure amongst all the branches who have been benefited from that particular functioning of the corporate office. This is basically the cross check. The moment you are not able to identify and you are more going towards the attribution of the cost to the relevant beneficiaries, that is the main aspect of the uh, this one cross charge. Friends, please also appreciate that it is basically the common pool costs which are covered within this: technical services, management services, back support, office services, finance and accounts, IT. We have the most celebrated judgment of Columbia Asia, whereby the learned appellate authority for advanced ruling even upheld that the salaries and everything will be included for the purpose of cross charge. While I agree with the ruling, in my humble opinion, that ruling is correct, but the only difference which I would like to distinguish that particular ruling as not to apply on most of the units is in terms of valuation. In Colombia, Asia, the valuation benefit was might not have been available because those were the cases of hospitals which are providing exempt supplies, and therefore they cannot take the ITC of the cross charge being charged from the corporate office. Now, this particular case will not be the case in 95% of the SSCs who can take 100% of the credit which is charged by the corporate office. And in those particular cases, friends, you can simply take any value on the invoice giving reference to rule 28 second proviso, which will safeguard the uh, unit from the high valuations and blockages of the working capital. So cross charge, to my humble opinion, would cover the attributions of the common pool costs between the different branches by a corporate office. Now we come to the last but most important topic, the input service distributor. Now, input service distributor is different from a cross charge or a supply. Supply, as we have understood, there was a requirement of a branch fulfilled by the other branch. Cross charge, there is an attribution of the common pool cost. Input service distributor has been specifically defined in section 2 subsection 61 to mean an office of the supplier of goods or services or both which receives tax invoice issued under section 31 towards the receipt of input services. So meaning thereby the vendor is providing the input services to the supplying branch. Supplying branch means who is supplying to the customer, but is issuing or is sending the invoice to another office of the supplier. So another office will be definitely a branch of the supplier for the purpose of clearance, or there can be a central banking system in this branch, and accordingly this particular branch will clear the invoice of the input services received at that supplier branch. Now what is the problem? Section 16.2 becomes a problem. Section 16.2 says for receiving or for availing the input tax credit, you need to have four conditions. Amongst them, two of them, the most important one being you should be in possession of a tax invoice, and also the supply of services or goods should have been received. In this particular case, one branch is receiving the service while the other branch is receiving the invoice, and therefore none of the branch fulfill the two conditions of section 16 subsection 2 simultaneously. So none of the branch will be able to take the credit. To overcome this kind of a problem, the mechanism of input service distributor was devised to mean the office which of the supplier of goods which received the tax invoice issued under section 31 towards the receipt of input services. My dear friend, there is no concept of distribution of ITC of goods or capital goods, inputs or capital goods under the input service distributor scheme. It is only restricted to input services, and that particular office will do what? It will issue a prescribed document for the purpose of distributing the credit of central tax, state tax, I-tax, or union territory tax paid on such services to the supplier of taxable goods or services or both having the same PAN as that of the said office. So meaning thereby whatever credit it has received on the invoice, it will simply transfer that particular credit to the supplying branch who has received the input services. So for example, the security guards are located in Goa branch or Goa factory. However, the corporate office receives a bill from the vendor for clearance. In this particular case, the corporate office may act as an ISD and will transfer that particular credit to the supplying branch. Working as an ISD also benefit the entire entity in allocating the input tax credit to the receiving branch very specifically, and there are no valuation issues also involved. Reason being, valuation is only applicable when there is a supply. Supply can be a specific supply or in form of a cross charge. But ISD is not making a supply. ISD is merely a distributor who is just routing the credit to the correct branch. And there the specific procedure has been prescribed in Rule 39 to provide that if a particular ITC relates to a particular branch, the ITC should be directed to that particular branch. But if it is relatable to more than one branch, then it need to be distributed in the mechanism as prescribed under Rule 39 by the input service distributor. Please also appreciate, as you have by now understood, that there is a specific distribution mechanism, a formula which has been provided for input service distributor, but there is no specific formula for distribution which has been provided for cross charge, or for that matter the supply valuations. So while the earlier two are more in terms of supply and valuation, which will be posing a challenge, the third one, which is merely a distribution, should be looked independently and not as a supply, and is covered solely as per the provisions provided under Rule 39. Now, coming on to some very specific mentions of transactions between the branches. Friends, the first one is, can an employee be called a employee of multiple branches? I would simply put it in, a small example. If we speak about Delhi, Patna, and Mumbai, we might say a employee might be working for some time in Mumbai, sometime in Patna, sometime in Delhi. How can he be called an employee of Mumbai? But now let me just enlarge the example. I am saying there is a office of the multinational company in Delhi, and its head office is in, let us say, California. Now the employee has traveled from California to Delhi to look after some particular work. Now that particular transaction is being looked at as either the secondment, or it is being looked at as a manpower supply. When we are very clear about such particular international transactions, that yes, a company can have different branches having identifiable employees in international space. When it comes to the domestic space, this particular issue becomes, I would say, more debatable, and people often like to debate on this, that there cannot be a distinguishment of an employee allocated to a particular branch within the domestic space. To my humble opinion, this law should mature over the period of time, because at the end of the day, it is a consumption based tax. GST need to reach the place where the supply of goods or services has been consumed. However, yes, amongst branches, while these should be identified as supplies, there should be, at least to the extent of the employee and the common costs, there need to be a relaxation in terms of value, that only the value which is having an attributable ITC should be divided between the branches. All other values should be taken out. To this extent, an amendment in the law is required, uh, subject to that Rule 28 second proviso also being there. But this particular amendment is much required to allow the respective ITC to reach the correct state, but without burdening the entity uh, with the working capital blockage, or for that matter, burdening with taxes, without doing any supply to a third party, but amongst its own branches within the country. So this is more of a valuation problem, not a supply problem. Second, services of management personnel, directors, CFO, taxation head, yes, they are performing their function sitting at a particular branch, and therefore that particular branch will be looked at as supplying services of management or business support to other branches. Please do not look it as a person supplying management or support services to other branch. It is the branch supplying the management or support functions to the other branches. Supply of free services to third parties, 17(5)(h) applicability as gift, or I would say, uh, you know, the samples. Definitely, there are issues when you speak about the free services to the employees. But to my humble opinion, if it is a part of the employment contract, they will be outside the ambit. But if it is beyond the employment contract, those particular supplies which are made even to the third parties would fall within the purview of supply by the company to those particular employees, and more particularly when they are the employees of other branches. Supply of fixed assets, disposal in case of different branches. Now, this has become a big problem. If you are locating or if you are providing the recording of correct assets lying within the correct GSTN, this will not be of much of a problem. You will be able to take care of it. But if your recordings are not proper, and the fixed assets are lying at some other branches, recorded at some other branch, things might complicate themselves in terms of the benefits or the sale value of scraps being accruing at some other place, while the writing off in terms of ITC is happening at some other place. Please do look into these particular things. Corporate guarantee, whether it will be taxable, to my humble opinion, during the service tax era, the problem was not of much interest, and it was merely academic. Reason being, there was no provision of deeming valuation under service tax. However, this particular problem has been taken care in GST, and you have specific provisions which provide for deeming valuation. And friends, to this particular extent, you have to be cautious in terms of corporate guarantees, and more particularly when these particular guarantee relate to more than one branches, whether you will be distributing that particular cost as cross charge, or if it is relatable to a specific branch, it can also be passed on as a supply, or ISD will be a better mechanism, to my humble opinion. Now, valuations, we have already spoken when we were discussing the different aspects. Credit optimization. Now, some of the persons feel that I can move my credit between any branches using cross charge. My humble request to these particular set of assesses will be, please do not play with your cross charge like that. You have to have a system. I'm not saying you should be having cost plus 10% or something like that. No, but whatever you're following, please follow a standard system. Otherwise, these can be looked at as a maneuvering of the credits which are otherwise not movable from one branch to the other branch, and they can have implications in being disallowed in the courts, when courts will find that this particular movement of credit was not otherwise available. However, when you look at the larger picture, at the end of the day, state should not be having any losses till the point the entire credit is available to the receiving branch. Reason being, if a credit moves from one state to another, the taxes also move from that particular state to the receiving state, and therefore receiving state is not at a loss. However, if you look at from the overall perspective, if a tax has to be blocked at a particular location and cannot go to the rescue or to the benefit of another person, then in that particular case the other person should have paid more taxes, and therefore this particular movement of credits will be tested definitely in the courts in the coming days, and to my humble opinion is not a good practice. GP variances across branches will also tell you whether you are doing correct or not. Now, to arrive at the particular GP credit, you will have to be very sensitive that we are talking about a GSTN wise trial balance. Unless you have a GSTN wise trial balance, you cannot obtain a correct valuation or a correct movement identification of supplies, cross charge, or ISD between your branches. So, a GSTN wise trial balance is a means to achieve the end, which is the correct tax payment under GST. In terms of recipient determination, it has always been problem that because the mandates are usually given by the corporate office, but the recipients are defined that the supply will happen to this particular branch. Now, in this particular case, friends, the definition of recipient, as has been defined in Section 293 of CGST Act, is very clear. It means a person in where the consideration is not to be paid is the person who is receiving those goods or services. So, amongst branches, the recipient would be the person who is receiving those particular goods or services from the other branch. So please be careful that there can be transactions where no actual money transaction have taken place, but there has been a provision or supply of services or goods between the different branches. No credit available to the receiving location. It is more sensitive a case. Reason being, Rule 28 second proviso will not come to your rescue. Be very, very clear. You cannot play with that particular thing. You have to restructure, represent before the government that yes, without doing anything, there is a cash loss in terms of GST tax payment which is happening to your entity, and therefore the representation before the government to rectify the valuation rules will be the only resort. Now, ending my deliberation with last thought, when I spoke about the GP variations, please do make the trading accounts of different units, and if they are in the same line of business, please do look into the fact that why they are having a different GP and NP on a GSTN basis also. More or less, they should be having similar GP or NP ratio and similar cash vis-a-vis credit payment of the output tax ratio. So your output tax should be paid in the similar ratio of cash and credit. However, there can be extraordinary circumstances in terms of uh, installation of a new machine, or for that matter, installation of some buying of a fixed asset, which can become a extraordinary input tax credit into a particular branch. But barring that, there has to be some parity, if not absolute, between the GPs and the NPs of the different branches. So uh, I hope, friends, this particular deliberation would have brought, because this was being sought by many. And yes, nobody is an expert in this particular regime, but I have shared my thoughts on this particular topic. In case of any further questions, you can please reach out to me on this particular topic. Thank you. Thank you for your patient listening.